We're very excited because we have a good friend on the line. We're going to talk about Deep Space Nine together, and especially what we left behind, that epic documentary that we got to see. Please welcome fellow Starfleet Command Officer Rex Wood. Welcome, Rex.
Good evening.
Rex, give us an idea of how you got into Trek and where you grew up and how that affected you.
All right. So I grew up in a smaller town in Illinois. Got into Trek when I was a lot younger. I was probably 6, 7 years old at that time. So I kind of came in right after, I would say, that the original series had ended. More in the 70s at that point. Became a huge fan, basically how a lot of us did back then on the reruns that were constantly on television on certain channels. Usually an independent station, usually a third station like an ABC station would run them in the afternoons after school. Got very involved with it back then. Actually grew really close to kind of a welcome committee member back in the days from Michigan. And she got me involved quite a bit at that point with things that were going on. So as I was younger, it was kind of a little different back then because I could say that maybe being a Star Trek fan was a little different back in the 70s. You were kind of looked on as that weird nerd. And as today, we all know that it's a lot different for us out there than what it was before. But did a lot of things of making my own uniforms. We didn't have any kind of communication with each other back then because we didn't have internet. So it was a lot of writing to people. The welcome committee itself would put out a newsletter. And that was kind of our connection back then with Star Trek. And so it became very, very important to me. My room was filled full of Star Trek stuff. My mom probably really got angry with me because I would tape a lot of stuff on the walls. I would have a lot of stuff from Starlog back then. A lot of things like that. And through grade school, through junior high, I would have that off and on Star Trek party at home. We actually did a small con, which was kind of cool too. That was our only way of doing anything together. And so it was very, very localized at that point. So Star Trek started out with me very, very early.
That's great. And it's a lot like us too. Because we got into it back in the 70s when it was harder to meet fans.
Starlog magazine was our internet, and I was a member of the Well Committee as well. I remember being so excited when I got that Well Committee letter. Like I felt I was something much larger than I was.
Right. And it was just, it was typewritten at that point. It was like mimeographed. There weren't any pictures really in it. It was mostly a lot of reading. And that was our communication to know whether we were going to get a movie or a series. I can remember going back and forth of, we're going to get a series, we're going to get a movie. Now we're not going to get anything. And that was really, our communication. We had no internet. So fans have got it so much easier today than we did back then.
So why do you think that you stuck with Trek for so many decades? What makes Star Trek different than all other fandoms?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, and I always get that question about, are you a Star Trek fan? Are you a Star Wars fan? And I like Star Wars, I really do, but I'm more connected to Trek basically because, yes, it did come out before, and I was watching it before Star Wars came out. But I also think the message that Star Trek does is a lot different message than Star Wars. I feel like Star Trek kind of explores more the human being, the places inside of us. It explores a lot of modern events that are happening back then. They were hitting a lot of things like that. Where some of the Star Wars stuff I felt like was, it was neat, but it was like a lot of battling and stuff like that, where, the Starfleet seems to be going out. We had our battles, yes, but we go out and we try to, create that peaceful environment. A lot of the episodes I connected with. I connected with the cast really well. I just thought that back then the cast really jumped out at me. People like Captain Kirk and of course Mr. Spock and McCoy were just wonderful role models to me back then. I actually grew up without a father on top of it. So believe it or not, some of these people tended to be my role models, as male role models in my life, seeing, the things that they would overcome each week, having that episode that would overcome some difficulty, but also at the same time, just, learning the way that life works a lot. So I have stuck with it because it has that meaning, that closer meaning to me about things that are going on in my life, things that are going on in today's life. You can almost, and you can take every Star Trek episode and kind of convert it into something that has happened in your life. And it's continued on through all the other series too.
Now, we are part of the Starfleet Command fan club, and you are as well. We got a chance to meet you at a con together, and I think that's one of the best things about fandom, to be part of these unique fan clubs, is the camaraderie that you build. And we're so happy to be able to meet you and to be surrounded by other people. And like, we're in Nashville and you're in Louisville area. And when we travel, we get to meet other Star Trek fans, and we have that unique camaraderie. What made you want to go to the next level, to be a costumer, as well as be a pivotal point in your local chapter of Starfleet Command?
Well, I was a costumer early. I mean, like I said, we didn't have any way of having costumes done. So, back in the day, we all made our own costumes, and they didn't look the greatest. They weren't as neat as they are now, but we made our own costumes. And as it's gotten more available to be able to do the cosplay a little bit more and have the uniforms, I've gotten into it a lot more, especially now. I guess as I revisit things, as you get older, being 55 years old that I am now, you start to revisit a lot of things. And so I've gotten more involved in it. I mean, I've been involved over the years, but I would say probably over the past few years, I've gotten more involved with it. I found Starfleet Command, and we all know that there's other organizations out there. One thing I liked about Starfleet Command was that it was all based with local people more. So it kind of reminded me of that hometown club that I had back when I was in grade school. It seems like having that local connection, having those people that you can talk to, is a great thing, and actually have meetings. We started the club from scratch. So myself and my first officer, Trevor Stanfield, and his wife, Sarah Stanfield, started it from scratch. So we're kind of a new ship this year, but we're growing very, very quickly. We're outreaching to a lot of fans and trying to grow it. It is a lot easier now to grow a fan club than when I was in grade school, of course. But I really enjoy the getting together, us being able to talk about Trek, the plans that we have that we're making to work with charities and everything like that. It's just really exciting to see that. Plus, I think for these clubs to actually continue, we've got to look at what our young fandom looks like and see where we're going. A lot of times we've got a lot of older people, but we don't have the young fans that we need to sometimes keep these organizations going. So we actually are looking very heavily at involving younger people, hopefully with, the series that's going to be on Nick this year and things like that. We're going to wind up maybe energizing some of those younger people into Trek a lot more and getting them involved in our organizations. But I think really the future of fandom right now is going to be these clubs that are like Starfleet Command.
That is a great idea, trying to recruit younger people, because I mean, like I said, we all started in the 70s, and so it's like, yeah, we've been with it a long time, but it's great to see that the younger kids who are into Star Trek.
Right, absolutely.
Now, Rex,
and you can see that it's getting better. I mean, we're getting a lot more younger fans.
Now, Rex, you got a chance to see What We Left Behind in theaters, just like we did. We were blown away.
Right.
It was so well made, and it was truly a love letter to the fans. How did you feel about it when you saw it?
Well, I think I think one of the biggest things and why I pick out of kind of what we would call the newer series after, the original series. Deep Space Nine has really become one of my favorite series. A lot of it is just because of the way that it was put together, the character development. Roddenberry had died, and I think in some ways the writers' gloves were kind of pulled off their hands a little bit, and they could kind of explore some different areas. I really feel like they explored some really great areas during the series. But it did leave us with something more. I mean, that last episode, you kind of sat there and said, okay, there can be more. And it was so nice that Ira and everybody came together and actually was able to do this for us because everybody has always had that question about, what would have happened? How would it have continued if it would have continued on? Wasn't so happy and I laugh about it with Aaron Eisenberg. We laughed about it on it, which we'll talk about here at some point. We laughed about how he kills Nog off, in that, and so wasn't real happy that he killed off one of my favorite characters, but it gave you some kind of closure to it. It was also nice just to hear everybody talk about it. I mean, you think of the amazing thing with Sisko being the first black captain, the first black commander, the first one in charge of something. And then I also think that Deep Space Nine was more about protecting something, where the other series were exploration. And yes, we had the Gamma quadrant that they went into, but I think Deep Space Nine was more about protecting something. So that's why I was so glad when they decided to do this follow-up because we needed it so badly.
Now, this series ran from 1993 to 1999, 7 seasons, reflecting on it through this documentary. And I truly believe that this is the type of show that got better with age.
I agree with you. I mean, I hear a lot of people. Matter of fact, there was just a discussion on one of the boards between Voyager and between Deep Space Nine, and some people, of course, they love Voyager, and I really love Voyager too. As a matter of fact, I love everything Star Trek. But a lot of people will say that it did kind of drag to begin with. And it does. It really does. I would agree with them. It dragged, but then we get into so much later on when we get into the founders and we get into all the different things that go on. And the more we experience and explore those characters that are in the series, it just gets better and better. So yeah, I think like any beginning series, sometimes the first seasons aren't the best. But I think if you kind of get through a few of them, and even if you go back and rewatch them, you'll find out there was so much more substance and so much character development in that show.
That is so true because Deep Space Nine, of course, it's different from the other Star Trek shows, but it's still Star Trek. It still has the stories to tell, the great stories about humanity and all of the great characters, the way they work together, the way they have conflict. Everything is still, it's still Star Trek quality.
It dealt with issues of genocide, terrorism, bigotry, post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, it was so pertinent that these issues were brought up on a stable station because now we're dealing with it from the eyes of a father through his son, through the eyes of a son with his friend, through the eyes of someone from another planet that had to change her ways and her upbringing was not pristine. This was a totally unique setting in the Star Trek universe that when we watch it and rewatch it and rewatch it, it just has this unique quality of, I mean, an addiction. When you binge watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine, it's hard not to watch multiple episodes in a row. And that in itself was groundbreaking for that format in the mid-90s.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, when you go back and look at it, everything was kind of episodal based. There was a little bit of continuation, but mostly everything worked out in an episode. And I think with Deep Space Nine, you got that serial feel to it. We kept kind of going through, and that's exactly as you said during the binge watching, you want to see the next one because you've got that continuation on there and going, gosh, I got to see the next one because I got to see what happens here and I got to see what happens there. I think also, the relationship between Nog and Jake. I mean, you look at it to begin with, how Nog was very so prejudiced with humans. You got to remember that he always said humans all the time. He really didn't want to be Jake's friend. But as it moves on, Jake teaches him how to read, all that kind of stuff. And it's just really amazing how they go from probably hating each other immensely. Here's this guy, a kid from Earth, and what is he doing here? And I don't want to have anything to do with him. And of course, Jake's there going, hey, you know what? I want to be your friend. I'm pushing to be your friend. And Nog is always pushing against him. And then when you go to, you get towards the rest of the show, how good of friends that they are and how they become friends and how I think in a lot of ways, Nog's career in Starfleet actually comes from Jake kind of pushing him that direction. Even though Jake doesn't go into Starfleet himself as a writer, I think the reason why Nog goes into Starfleet is he wants to change. He doesn't want to be like the rest of the Ferengi. He wants to be different. And I think that's what I think Jake pushing him that way actually is why he becomes a fleet officer at that point. You talked about PSSD. That's a big thing that they went into. I mean, there were so many things that they covered back then. When the show was on, that we had so many different characters on the show. When you look at Dax and how that whole thing occurs with her and how that changes and it goes into with her being a man then being a woman and how that whole symbiote thing goes on. I mean, they attacked so much in that show when it came to racial boundaries, to sexual gender boundaries, all that kind of stuff.
Now, over the years, we've got a chance to see and meet many of the actors on the show, but Kavura had a unique opportunity to be on stage with Aaron Eisenberg.
When they had Creation Con Atlanta, they had a lot of the actors from all the different Star Trek shows, but they also did a karaoke, and some of the actors were there for the karaoke, and they got on stage with some of the people who performed on stage. I decided to do karaoke that night. And Aaron Eisenberg and J.G. Hertzler were on stage, and they kind of contributed. While I was singing, they would make comments in the background, and they were awesome. I mean, they were great, and I had such a wonderful time.
And that's a unique thing about these actors is that they have a camaraderie amongst themselves. Not all shows do the actors get along with each other. But the cast were truly like a family, and you could always tell when actors are faking it. I don't want to say always tell, but sometimes you could tell when they're faking it, when they put on fake smiles, or when they have genuine relationships with each other. Deep Space Nine has that reputation of being a unique, cohesive unit, and I think that documentary solidified that feeling.
I think especially with the Ferengi staff, the Ferengi cast, they were so close. You hear them talk about that, especially in the documentary, about how close they were. I think that's why it made the show so well. You were talking about Aaron Eisenberg. Aaron, I think, is one of the most human out of all of them. I think a lot of it has to do with, when he was a child, he had kidney disease and his actual height was stunted. But I think if you talk to people, they will tell you that Aaron actually is one of those people that every Star Trek fan is a friend, automatically. If you're a fan, you're a friend. And I've heard him talk sometimes about how when people go to cons, a lot of the stars don't stay usually for the last day, like Sunday. And he's like, I love Sunday. Sunday's the best day, and so he wants to stay for the fans. And I think that's what makes him kind of extra special to a lot of the fans.
No doubt about it. The documentary helped us to appreciate all that was going on on the show with regards to the writing, with regards to the casting. It didn't really give us so much new information when it went through the interviews, but it was refreshing to see the actors current day reminiscing about it. But what it did do is they gave up the scenario of what if there was an 8th season. Now, we keep up with the Star Trek novels, so if you keep up with the books, that's not much of a mystery. But I like that idea of putting a writer's room together and hoping that another season would come to be. I mean, we could only dream about things like that. That's not realistic. But wow, what a way to build a documentary, have multiple storylines going on. And whenever we talk about Deep Space Nine, it's one of those things. It's hard to pin down a certain episode that is exceptional because of the running storyline. Obviously, there's some that stand out, like Paper Moon,
Far Beyond the Stars,
another exceptional one. But Paper Moon, that has special meaning to you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the Paper Moon episode is kind of right after Nog loses his leg in the battle that he has, and he comes back to Deep Space Nine. And, once that happens, he's not sure of himself. Now, why that becomes so special to me is because I actually am an amputee myself. I've lost both my legs below knee, lost them both within a 2-year period of time. And you go through a lot with that, and one thing I like about this episode is that he does show how basically very well how an amputee actually feels going through the process, because you may be okay and your doctors are telling you you're okay, but you're not always okay. On the outside, you may look okay to people, but you become that introvert, which Nog actually does in the episode. He goes in and becomes, goes into the holodeck and spends his time in there. And, the holodeck, I think in this episode, but I would say kind of is like addiction, goes to addiction. Okay. So like a drug in that case. And like a lot of us that have had amputations, we have something what's called phantom pains, which comes from the nerve still kind of being there. But what happens is you still feel like you have feet, you still feel like you have legs, you still feel like the limbs are there. And the body remembers a lot of it. So you can have pain in your big toe without even having a big toe. And so he goes through a lot of that. You also see that he goes through them telling him it's all in his mind, that he's fine. The doctor's saying your synthetic leg is working properly. Your pain regulation is low, but it still doesn't matter. It's what the mind does. So this episode really covered a lot of that. It became probably my favorite episode because of this, because I think it shows so much. This episode also helps other people. I have at times taken the episode in with me when I've actually talked to people who are really new amputees, and I show them that. And it's really amazing how they get it. They see it. And, we don't always create a Star Trek fan, but we create a fan of the episode. And we actually bring out what that really means at that point. It's a wonderful thing. We get some laughs, we get some tears, but they realize by watching the episode, yeah, you go through all this, but at the end, everything's fine. You can still do what you did before, keeping that positive attitude. Seeing that a drug is an addiction, and that's why I said the holodeck tends to kind of represent that addiction. He gets addicted to a drug that puts him in a different world where he doesn't have to think about what's going on. He doesn't have to relate with the rest of the crew at that point. He only has to relate with Vince. And I think also the Vince character during that was one of the most wonderful things in the world. I think that was handled well. That whole relationship was handled well, with him helping him along. So it was really a great episode. And I think Aaron Eisenberg did a wonderful thing with that. I've discussed that with him a couple times on his podcast, and we did that just recently. And I don't think he realized how impactful it was at that time. He was much younger. He didn't realize what he was doing was so impactful on people. And that's why when we met, basically online and started talking about it, I think in some ways he knew that people were impacted by it, but he didn't know how.
And that's a wonderful thing that you do, how you're able to take Trek with you and show other people that are amputees how Trek reflects the real world and how it's helped you, and you use this tool to help others.
Absolutely. It is a wonderful thing. And I think that there's a lot of episodes through all the series that can kind of take that same connotation. I think that's what's great about Star Trek is it has helped so many people that have had difficulties in life actually be able to change things. I mean, you go back to listen to James Doohan. He had several experiences. As a matter of fact, you can remember him talking about saving a lady from suicide one time. And you'll see that interviews and where he's in tears over it, where the lady came to the con and told him, you know what, you saved my life. And I think sometimes the actors don't realize how impactful, and I think that's something that Star Trek has done. It's been so impactful to so many people in different situations, showing people that, yeah, you can still be odd, but you can still be accepted,
They showed that in a lot of ways. We also just watched the episode in which Nog decided to join Starfleet, and that was something, brought out something too, because we had someone like he was going to be the first Ferengi in Starfleet. He was doing something that his uncle was against. He thought his father would be against it, but his father turned out to like it. But it just shows another turn of characters and how they can do things that we're not expecting.
And that reflects on real world. If you come from a culture or from a family that expects a certain lifestyle from a child, what if that child changes lifestyle? And how does the family react? How does the child act upon his own inclinations, or does he fold under pressure? I mean, these are some amazing episodes that were devised under the guise of science fiction. I mean, it follows the same format that Gene Roddenberry had done decades before, but now it brought it into a whole new world of potential problems that were very pertinent at that time and are still pertinent today.
Right, absolutely. I mean, you go back and look at a lot of the episodes. You go back to the one where Cisco goes back in time and he's a writer. Okay, I think that's one of the biggest impactful episodes because they really look at the prejudice at that time, and it goes into, the prejudice of today. But I think if you go back and look at that episode, I think that was some of the best acting in that episode. Just because that very end of it. And if you hear some of the actors talk about it, they'll say that he really fell into that part very, very well. He actually, he had issues with it. They had issues coming out of it because he had fallen into that being that black man and being held down by society. And they said it was really amazing. He became that character through that whole thing. And towards the end of it, he had a hard time snapping out of it because of what was going on. And I've heard stories that wasn't really supposed to be about Cisco. It was going to be about Jake. It kind of changed into that. But if you look at that episode and how impactful that is, and I hear people say, whatever. I think it was probably one of the best ones, even though it was kind of earlier on. But I think what they covered there was really wonderful because that just covered prejudice in that time of prejudice, that what was happening, and I think became an instrumental episode in Space Nine.
We talked to the writer Mark Allen Zickery about that, and he said he created that story because it's a story that needed to be told. And when you think about it, at that time, Trek was roughly 25, 30 years old, and that didn't get addressed. And that was one of those wow factors. When you were done watching that, you walked away saying, ouch, that hurt. That was so powerful. But that's what Star Trek is. That's what Deep Space Nine is.
Just looking at what they covered with the characters, when you go back to looking at Garrick and some of the things that was going on with him, it's really amazing just how much character development went through that show. I mean, there was so much constantly going on with the relationship between Kara and Odo and how that started and how Odo felt about that. I mean, it really, to me, that series had the best character development out of any of them, I believe.
And I used to erroneously say that Deep Space Nine got better after 3 seasons. It got better when Worf came on. It got better when the Defiant came on. And the older that I got, the more I realized that the show was always very well done. I was just impatient. Or I was comparing it to Next Generation, because early on it was being shown at the same time as Next Generation. Next Generation was going fast forward. It was full throttle with action, adventure. Deep Space Nine was a very different pace because it was building characters slowly. It did not rush you into things. And so I've come to appreciate what an amazing series Deep Space Nine was.
And I think you also, just hearing things off and on, there was a lot of confrontation with writers between Ira and Mark, because Mark Berman was trying to be more to the core, and Ira was pushing a lot of the character development. I think Ira pushed a lot of that and pushed a lot of the expanding. Mark was thinking about moving on, at some point moving on to Voyager. And Voyager became that more, what I consider mainline Star Trek. Everything's bright, the bridge is bright, all the lights are up. Where Deep Space Nine, everything was dark. I think Ira had a lot to do with how that show felt. And he took it. That's why I think that the documentary became a big love for him, is because of how much he poured into that show. And just by listening to some of the other people talk about how, I'm sure there were some conflicts between those two, because he believed a lot in the Roddenberry way, and Ira had a whole different agenda of what he wanted to do. So from what I hear, there's a lot of give and take during it. But I think if Ira hadn't been involved with Deep Space Nine, I don't think it would have been the same show. I really don't.
And because Deep Space Nine was on during the time that, the Next Generation was already on, but it was on the last few years when Deep Space Nine was on. And then right after that, right after TNG, Voyager came on. So, and that was something they talked about in the documentary, how Deep Space Nine was never the only Star Trek on TV. So it kind of got less attention at the time. But as we've said, it's one of the shows that just gets better with time, because it's still relevant now. And because it was more serialized, and now we can just stream it on Netflix and you can binge watch it. And it's just great to just sit and watch it like all the way through.
And I like the fact that the media that's involved, like we're rereading the Deep Space Nine comics, and they actually fit in with the universe, because the comics were coming out at the same time as the TV show. The novels that they built upon during the show, as well as later on, I mean, they really focus in more on the person, more on the character, as opposed to the scenario. So in that sense, Deep Space Nine is such a refreshing change.
Oh, absolutely it was. I mean, like I said, you guys explained it exactly. It becomes better with age. It's one of those that you watch, and every time you watch it, and every time I watch it, I get to the end and you kind of take that rest and you're like, no, I want to go back and see it again, because there's so much that you miss of the storytelling, and what was going on. I also feel that Deep Space Nine had a lot to do with what I think modern television is like now. When you look at the new series Discovery, I think because of what Deep Space Nine was doing with the more serial type thing, I think in a lot of ways that's rubbed off on Voyager. But I also feel like Game of Thrones, I really think Deep Space Nine really pioneered a lot of what went on with Game of Thrones and has gone on with the new Discovery series too at the same time, because it pushed that got away from the episodial that we've always had. And I think that's why some Star Trek fans did have some problems with it. A lot of them liked having that conclusion to things, at the end of it. And Deep Space Nine just kept you hanging. And that, to me, was the marvelous thing about it.
Another beautiful aspect of the show is we said the phrase character development a lot. And you can argue and say, well, every Star Trek series has some sort of character development. There's nothing more radical than the character, I'd say, overhaul in some ways from the first season of Deep Space Nine to the last season of Deep Space Nine. I mean, you want to talk about massive changes in a character and that we were essentially growing with them. This is the show that shakes things up more than any other one.
Absolutely. I mean, I just think that the way that Odo was developed from the beginning, you go through just the very second episode, they get into that prejudice against the shapeshifter. The episode, where he is accused of killing somebody and it winds up being a clone. And that brings out another point. It's one of the lines that's in that episode about killing a clone is still murder. Okay? Even though it's not what they were considered a real person, but that was one of the lines in the movie. And when you think about that, that was really a deep meaning. Yes, the person was known differently, but killing a clone is still murder. But all the stuff that happened, and that was just episode coming right out of the Emissary episodes, the two-parter on the beginning. So they were starting some really deep stuff right at the beginning. I think that's why a lot of people, to begin with, talk about it being slow because of what they were covering. There wasn't battles right off the bat. The Klingons weren't swooping in and starting to attack the station. Things weren't happening the way normal Star Trek episodes did. And I still hear it today. I mean, like I said, I still see fans on chat boards that will tell you that they think Deep Space Nine was one of the worst series. And I always kind of argue with them that, all series are great, but I still think Deep Space Nine, out of what was the other ones and what's been on, other than, of course, the original, I think is probably the premier series that they did. I just think you got to be able to get yourself through it for a first time and realize how special that it is.
Now, when you walked out of the movie theater, what were your feelings?
Well, I can tell you a little bit more of what I would consider completeness. Actually, even though we never really got to see the last episode made, getting a movie made like other ones had made, you at least felt a little bit more completed about what was going on. You felt like now you kind of knew what the possibilities are. But, beyond that, there's still possibilities with Cisco. I mean, we had a long conversation, and we actually went and, like I think most groups did, they went somewhere, sat down, got something to eat, and actually discussed it. And, we discussed about there's still some more to deal with Cisco and being the emissary and coming back even more. But I think they left you with at least a conclusion that we might get from the series itself. And I think that's how we felt. I mean, we were ecstatic going in, and I think we felt so much better when we came out.
That's right. It just gave you a good feeling when you come out. It makes you, and the whole movie just makes you, remember how wonderful the show really was.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest thing about it. And that's why, when I talk to somebody who's got that bad feeling about Deep Space Nine, I say, you got to go through it. I've had people go, I can only watch this. You have to go through it, because I think as you get through it, you're going to realize how great of a series it was. Just getting through that, what people call the dragging point. And I will tell you, when I first saw it, there were some dragging points for me. And there are a few episodes that you kind of, don't always want to discuss, but most of it, like I said, had a very good plot to it, and there was a lot of substance to it. And as we keep saying, character development, just, bringing Worf in, from the next generation. And then that relationship with Worf and Dax, and having to go through, when Dax changes and he's no longer married to Dax anymore, and he has to deal with her having a new relationship with somebody else. I mean, some of that stuff was just amazing writing at that point, and it just really went into a lot of social issues that we have now. I'm still really amazed at the writing in that series.
One thing that Steve and Ira Bear did admit is that they did not address issues of sexuality to the degree that they felt that they should. They kind of cowered to the networks, which was, well, you look at what the original Star Trek series did, and they wanted to address things that were controversial in a very tasteful way, and in a more of a thought-provoking way, something that would force you to think. But Stephen Ira Bear did admit that they dropped the ball in a couple of areas.
Yeah, and I think that was, some of the influences, and I think you hear about that. Ira was pushing more of some of the, I would say some of the deals with Garrick. A lot of us, and I think today they feel like Garrick had the tendencies of being, gay. And I think that wasn't covered well enough. I think some of the books out that you read now, you kind of see that a lot. But I don't think that back then there was still a little bit of too much Roddenberry influence into it a little bit. That they kind of, I think, like you said, caved to what was going on at that time. I think today, if Deep Space Nine was remade today, it would be a lot different. I think Ira would cover a lot more of that, and they would do a lot, because they've really done a lot more of that with Discovery, looking at, gay couples and things like that. I think that would have happened if it had been, made in today's time.
And that's one of the things I very much enjoyed about the documentary. It wasn't just tell me a story of things that I already know and just give me the highlights of all the fun things. I want to know the problems. I want to know the things that they would have changed. I want to know what about the series made him get up in the morning every day and push on, even though there was high negativity on many levels. I mean, so that there was a roller coaster of emotions throughout the entire documentary. I have to say, of all the docs that we saw in our lives, that is one of the most well made. And to consider that it was funded because of fan support, what does that tell us about how awesome Star Trek fans are?
Yeah, it is awesome. I mean, when you talk about that part of it, I think that's the biggest thing that you can say about Star Trek fans. We've got fan films out there. We've got all this other stuff going on. You look at other shows and other series that are out there. The Star Trek fans, man, they just keep going with it. And if it's something that makes a lot of sense, which all of it does, they're out there to support it. And that was the amazing thing about it, is just watching that build and build, and watching those funds build to have this done, because it was because of the Star Trek fans. It was because of the Deep Space Nine fans. If they had not been out there, if people had not loved that series the way it is, I don't think the documentary ever would have been made, because it wouldn't have been funded. So I think that's just fantastic.
It is. Well, we very much enjoyed watching the documentary. We encourage everyone, as soon as the documentary comes out on DVD, get your hands on it if you haven't seen it in the movies. And hey, Rex, we love talking to you. Give our love to Trevor and Sarah and the rest of the members of your crew. We know that we're going to be seeing you next at Starbase Indy.
Yes, absolutely, and hopefully we're planning on being at the Cincinnati Con, and then of course Galaxy Con will be coming kind of that same weekend, Starbase Indy, so it'll be kind of a switch off for us. We're going to be around because we're promoting Starfleet Command a lot. We want to get a lot of people involved in that. And so that's great. We always enjoy our time with all the different fans, but we also enjoy the time with you guys.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.